Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Life with Zach. Today I want to talk about a historic site in Richmond, Virginia that I recently visited called the Lumpkin Slave Jail. Now, this property is located kind of in the area of the Richmond Main Street station along Broad Street up against Interstate 95, kind of in the area of 15th Street. And as you can tell by the name, was a place where enslaved African Americans were held prior to being sold at one of the numerous markets or auctions that would have happened near the area. Now, this site also has another name. It is referred to as the Devil's Half Acre. Now, between the time this opened in the 1830s and the end of the Civil War, about 6 firms would operate a slave holding facility here. The last one being Robert Lumpkin, who purchased the property in 1844 and whose name the site now bears. Lumpkin actually had 4 buildings on this property: his residence, a tavern or restaurant area where people who were coming and interested in the slaves, purchasing the slaves, could spend the night, a kitchen where he fed both himself, these travelers, and the enslaved people, and then, of course, the large holding facility, the jail where the enslaved people were kept. Now, Lumpkin had these 4 sites because he knew that the people coming to see the slaves in the jail needed a place to stay and needed food to eat. And he was a businessman. So he was determined to make money, and he knew that not only is a profitability existed for holding the slaves before they went to auction, because he would be paid to do that, but there was also money to be made in the people actually coming to purchase the slaves themselves. Now, this slave jail was not a very nice place. It's described as having barred windows, fences, gates, the typical things you might think of in a jail, basically to keep these enslaved Africans to keep them trapped inside a system that was getting ready to sell them to who knows where and to who knows whom, to prevent escapes and the loss of money. Now, also within the slave jail was a whipping room where slaves would be punished if they did something that either Lumpkin or whoever was working for them, or whoever was coming to look for them, felt was wrong, disrespectful, or anything they could think of to bring some type of punishment on them. This whipping room would be used. And it is exactly what you can probably imagine in your worst nightmares. In this slave jail, and Lumpkin became known for the cruelty, and it was indeed one of the largest slave trading operations in Richmond, which was known as a center for the slave trade because a lot of enslaved Africans from Virginia who weren't necessarily utilized on a farm or some other business were being sold down south where there was need for more labor. So this must have been truly a horrible place for the African Americans who were enslaved and forcibly kept here. Now, what would happen is they would be brought here by their owner, who was determined to sell them for whatever reason. They would be kept here until the time of their auction, which there were nearby slave markets, or a lot of times the sales would happen in hotels. And then they would be brought to wherever the auction would happen. Someone would purchase them and then be brought back to the slave jail and held there until the transaction was completed and they were taken wherever they were going by their new owner. So you got to consider that a lot of traumatizing things were associated with this site, including probably some breakups of families, people being sent to places that they knew were horrible in the Deep South, where treatment and working conditions and things were a whole lot worse than a lot of other places. And to top that all off, just the lack of freedom, the oppression of the slave system, everything made this really a horrible sight. And I'm sure the name Devil's Half Acre really does not reflect how horrible um, experience these enslaved Africans had at this site. Now, of course, the end of the Civil War brings about the end of the slave system in Virginia. So, of course, Lumpkin and his family were no longer able to operate a slave jail here. Now, Lumpkin had died, um, and his widow, who actually was a mulatto woman, um, then rented the site to the Kohler Institute, which eventually becomes the Virginia Union University in Richmond, which was a historically black school, and its founder was a African American Baptist minister. So basically, she then takes the formerly site of the enslaved um, jail, this holding facility, and then rents it to someone who is working to provide educational opportunities for the local African American community. Um, so it really is an ironic twist of uses for this property. Now, in the 1880s, an iron machinery company buys the property and tears down these structures. And then over time, it actually develops into a parking lot that was used by the Virginia Commonwealth University um, until at some point it was turned over to from the state of Virginia to the city of Richmond, who has placed historic markers at the site um, and sponsored some archaeology in the early 2000s. Now, of course, the proximity to Interstate 95, what remains of the jail, what was found by the archaeology dig, included the site of the jail, but it's right up against the interstate embankment. So most likely the other three sites were completely destroyed when the interstate was put in, okay? That basically wiped out anything that remained. But luckily, archaeologists think that what they have found there in a test dig did reveal the remains of the jail itself. Okay, and like I said, the city has put up some historic markers. They have a fenced-in area where the jail itself was located, and some information. So it's definitely worthwhile making a trip here. It's part of the Slave Trail in Richmond, which follows the historic African American sites associated with slavery, from the landing point for enslaved people when they might come into the city through this auction, and even the historic African American burial ground, which is located near what was Lumpkins Slave Jail. I will say, though, that while there is some nice information and markers and things here, this site is really not as prominent as a lot of other local history sites. I also don't think it's as well maintained. Some of the signs were run down, and it was really kind of surrounded by a parking lot, and I don't think anyone really ever even noticed it was there. So, maybe the newest tragedy associated with the site is the fact that such a monumental piece of African American history and such a, horrible story and part of our collective narrative here in this nation and this state in our communities is really just hidden in plain view by a parking lot and really not observed by anyone. I was there for over an hour and no one else stopped to even take a look at the site. So, that is kind of a modern day tragedy for the Lumpkin Slave Jail site. But at the very least, something has been done to market and to protect what remains of the archaeology of the site. So, but again, I would definitely recommend visiting. There's some set aside parking here to visit the site. and you can, stop by. It's a little difficult to navigate through the parking lots, but basically you come in off of Broad Street, turn into the parking areas behind the Main Street station. And if you go up against the 95 embankment, you'll see 4 or 5 spots for the slave trail. And you can park there, and the Lumpkin site is right beside that. So I definitely recommend visiting and sharing information about this place that more people need to be aware of. So I hope you enjoyed this history moment. If you did, hit like. If you want to see other videos like it, subscribe. I have more history videos, both on my channel and that are coming out soon, so you don't want to miss those. Leave a comment with any questions or your experience at the Lumpkin Slave Jail, or if you've been to anywhere other African American history sites you want to share kind of the feedback with. I'd love to hear it, and I hope you have a great day.